filling in for Mr. Jerry Watkins, who got smart and went to Canada for 3 weeks. So I'll be the substitute. Let's see, today we're going over Genesis 38, Judah and Tamar. But I thought we'd do a review. And before that, let's do a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening to be able to get together and study your word, to learn more about you, to draw near to you as we study your word. And I pray that it would be edifying to all that are here and those that are online as well. I pray these things in the name of your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. So where were we last week? Remember? Genesis 37 was about Joseph and how his brothers threw him in the pit. Any thoughts on that? I did a study on that word Dothan. I think that's what it is, where he's told the man in the field tells him to go there. Just some quick thing that I found. Dothan. In later days, the eyes of Elisha's servant were opened to see the mountain full of horses and chariots of fire, guarding his master from the encircling Syrians. Do people remember that? In 2 Kings chapter 6. This is certainly to be identified with Tel Dothan. So that's another place in the Bible where that's found, which I kind of thought was interesting. That's an interesting story about Elisha. Anyway, any other thoughts? Where is it on the map? Oh, 2 Kings. Where in the Bible is it? Yeah, 2 Kings, chapter 6, verse 13 in particular. All right. Nobody has any thoughts or questions about last week. But one thing that I found interesting is you're going along and you're reading about Joseph, and in this chapter, all of a sudden it shifts to Judah and Tamar, and it's like kind of seems out of place. It's like the story of Judah gets sidetracked. Is this mic going out? Okay. So let's read the first few verses. Who wants to read? Let's read the first I don't know, the first 6 verses, first 7 verses. Genesis 38.
It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death.
Okay. There was a lot of players here. It gets kind of confused in the King James who's who. So one thing I noticed, it says he went down from his brethren. And it's my understanding that's sort of like the opposite of going up to Jerusalem. When you go up to Jerusalem, you're making aliyah. But here you're going down. And after what he had done, his involvement with and conspiring with his other brothers in regards to Joseph, he's probably morally, falling down, if you will. Okay. Right. Yeah, so what's wrong? What all is wrong with this picture? The verses we read. That's a good segue. One thing that I noticed, in the time that this is going on, Joseph is with Pharaoh in Egypt for 20 years before they are all met up again, I guess. In the meantime, Judah starts a family with these people who aren't even Israelites, right? So, so Mark's saying that the Canaanite man may have been closer to Egypt than Judah going way in the opposite direction. Is that? Right, but when is the famine? We don't really know when the famine. The famine doesn't start right when Joseph is there. It's probably he's been there for a few years. I don't know. $13 what? Yeah, it must have been the last 13 years, right? He must have been there for 7 years. Or no. The famine had been going on for 2 years, I believe, and they had 7 years of plenty, so that's 9. So he's gone. This could be 9 years for this story to develop. That's how I think about it. Did you have a question, Mara?
Yeah, my question was, do we have any idea in the time frame that he was picked up out of the cistern or the pit, and by the time the family met up was 20 years, but do we have a better judge of when this story happened? I mean,
Well, what struck, it had to take some time because he has 3 children, and one of them is married to Tamar, which we haven't gotten to yet. So, I mean, that's got to be at least 15 years, I'd say. I don't know. So he meets up with this new friend of his, Hera, the Adullamite, and he sees this Canaanite woman who's not named. The only thing we know is that she's the daughter of Shua, and she had a son, and the first son's name was Er, which I kind of find hilarious because God declares him as, well, we haven't gotten to there yet. He will turn out to be definitely an heir. Oh, we did read that. Verse 7, and Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh slew him. There's no depth or in-depth or reason why. It's just he's so bad that God just slew him. Getting the mic over here.
I was going to say the Adullam, which is where the Adullamite is from, is a city south of Bet Shemesh in Israel. Now, what's interesting is, didn't we learn that Bet Shemesh is also what the city of On is called?
On?
Remember, wasn't it the city of the sun? So here we have Bet Shemesh is the house of the sun.
Okay.
Very interesting. But it's in Israel, and this Adullamite is from this city south of Bet Shemesh in Israel.
Okay.
So maybe he did go to Canaan.
How far? Do you know what direction it is? Are they in Beersheba right now? Where? I'm curious where they're at, where Jacob is at. Is he in Hebron or Beersheba?
It is just east of Jerusalem.
Just east of Jerusalem. So that's interesting. So
I'm sorry, west of Jerusalem.
so he's going down like he's going to the Mediterranean. But that's a good example. He's going down. He's going the opposite direction of Jerusalem, if you will. Wendy?
Well, it says when the third son was born, Judah was in Chezib. Where's Chezib? Palestine, so like by Babylon?
I don't know where that's at.
By the way, this Beth Shemesh can also mean temple of the sun. Maybe that's the temple that Judah ended up going to, that Shemesh.
Shemesh could be the temple son, and that could be where he was going to meet up with Tamar. Well, Keseb here says, it is said by Eusebius and Jerome to have been situated near Adullam and to be then uninhabited. So I don't know for sure. Jerry's more of a map guy than I am. Tamar, do you know what Tamar means? In Judah, verse 6, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. It means palm trees. I'm not sure what that significance of that is, but we hear about another Tamar with David.
It says Adullam was one of the royal cities of the Canaanites.
Adullam was one of the royal cities of the Canaanites.
So there was royalty here. So Judah was over there mixing with royalty.
Judah was mixing with royalty.
Well, because you got this
I'm repeating what you're saying. I'm not challenging you. I'm repeating your question.
You have this temple of the sun, and his buddy, the Adulamite, he's obviously hooked up and befriended him as well.
Right. So he's mixing with royalty is what you would say.
Beth Shemesh also became a city of the Kohanim, one of the Levite cities.
Beth Shemesh became one of the cities of the Kohanim. Okay. All right, let's keep reading. Who wants to read to 18? Where'd we leave off? 8? Let's go to 8, from 8 to 18. Please. The mic's not on. The mic's not on. I don't think the mic's on, is it?
Hello?
There you go.
And Judah saith to Onan, Go in unto the wife of thy brother, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knoweth that the seed is not reckoned his, and it hath come to pass, if he hath gone in unto his wife, that he hath destroyed it to the earth, so as not to give seed to his brother. And that which he hath done is evil in the eyes of Jehovah, and he putteth him also to death. And Judah saith to Tamar his daughter-in-law, Abide a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son groweth up, for he said, Lest he die, even he, like his brethren, and Tamar goeth and dwelleth at her father's house. And the days are multiplied, and the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, dieth. And Judah is comforted, and goeth up unto his sheep shearers, he and Hira his friend the Adulamite, to Timnath. And it is declared to Tamar, saying, Lo, thy husband's father is going up to Timnath to shear his flock, and she turneth aside the garments of her widowhood from off her, and covereth herself with a veil, and wrappeth herself up, and sitteth in the opening of Enaim, which is by the way to Timnath. For she hath seen that the Shula hath grown up, and she hath not given to him for his wife. And Judah seeth her, and reckoneth her for a harlot, for she hath covered her faith. And he turneth aside unto her by the way, and saith, Come, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he hath not known that she is his daughter-in-law. And she saith, What dost thou giveth me to come, that thou mayest come in unto me? And he saith, I send a kid of the goats from the flock. And she saith, Dost thou give a pledge till thou send it? And he saith, What is the pledge that I should give to thee? And she saith, Thy seal and thy ribbon, thy staff which is in thy hand. And he giveth to her, and goeth in unto her, and she conceiveth to him.
Thank you. So how many sons does Judah end up having total? Did we go through all of them? We already talked about him. He got died off right off the bat.
So in verse 14, where it says, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. She sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. The interesting thing here is this word is not ishto, but it is isha. So in other words, it's not referring to that she's been given as a covenant wife. It just means that she's going to go in and the duty of a brother-in-law is going to be performed. How that relationship exists beyond that point, I'm not clear, and I'm sure someone in the house, the family, is taking care of her and the baby, but it's clear here that the word covenant wife is not being used.
So let's talk about that for a second. If you go up to verse 12, the daughter of Shua, wife of Judah's, it's Eshet. Now, what's the one that's the covenant wife? The one with the tav, right? So she, if I'm reading this correctly, in verse 12, the unnamed woman, the daughter of Shua, was a covenant wife. According to the spelling of, everybody see this right here?
Yeah, so 1 and 12, Judah's wife died. She is a top.
Right. See it up there?
Yeah.
Olive, Sheen, Tav. Right.
But the 1 in 14.
And the one in 14, let's go look at that real quick. It's two wife, Olive, Sheen, Hay. Everybody see that? So he wasn't, from a legal point of view, he wasn't looking at her as a covenant wife, which makes sense. He's just a temple prostitute, is what he thinks.
Well, and plus, the man has one covenant wife, and maybe she's going to be just.
You got the mic down there?
Just like Jacob, there was one covenant wife.
Right.
The other three were just Ishas. They were not an Ishto. So she's now going to be, because she was a covenant wife with someone, she now transfers from being a covenant wife to just being a wife, or whatever that's classified. She's not a covenant wife.
So I just wanted to review. So with the sons now, we have who got killed off right off the bat. Onan, what happened to Onan? Verse 8. And Judah said unto Onan, Go unto thy brother's wife and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, and lest that he should give seed to his brother. So what is that about? Verse 8? 8 and 9? Well, I want to know what is there any, what, in the Torah, what are we talking about here? Why is this guy doing this? Why is Judah wanting to do this? Yeah, he talks about the Levirate marriage, right? The law of the Levirate marriage requires that his brother take his wife and raise up heirs for him by her. Onan did not allow Tamar to conceive, so God killed him also.
So it's basically, it's saying that he was supposed to go in and lay with his brother's covenant wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, because the Hebrew word is ishto.
So here we are, verse 8 or verse 9. The wife there is one with the tav, right?
So she had covenant status, but now going with the youngest son, she's not going to have covenant status. She's just going to be in Isha.
Right. But okay, I guess you have to thinking about intent here. The intent was, if Onan did what he was supposed to do, she would have been the covenant. She would have been his covenant wife, his only wife.
Well, not unless he had a covenant wife already.
Well, Onan wouldn't. We're talking about Onan. Here, this is the second son of Judah, right? I'm assuming this was his first wife. He couldn't have been very old.
So I guess my question is, if Onan had performed the job of the brother-in-law, the child that Tamar had, that would be considered the brother's child, right?
It would have been Er's brother, right?
And not the brother-in-law's child. The brother's.
Even though physically he is.
He would have had to raise that child. So yeah, the brother-in-law has to take care of the woman and her child.
Throw the mic at him. Questions over here? By the way, this is in this in the Torah. It's Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10. Was that what you were getting at? Sorry about that.
Can we read Deuteronomy 5 or 25, 5 through 10?
Go ahead.
Okay. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, and pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. I thought
So
that was
where
interesting
did-
too, because it also relates to the story of Ruth.
Right.
And it's an interesting
Right.
parallel.
Okay, comment over here.
And so the nearest relative that was closer than Boaz, he took his shoe off and handed it to Boaz, if you remember.
Right.
So he's basically saying, yep, I'm refusing to do it. He didn't have to wait for her to come do it. He just took his shoe off and handed it to Boaz and said, here you go, I'm guilty as charged. I'm already admitting it myself. So it doesn't talk about any of the rest of it being done, but he did take his shoe off.
So that brother had, if you will, the first right of refusal, if you will. He had the first right of responsibility, and Boaz had to go to him first because that was the proper protocol to go that he had to go. He had to refuse first.
Okay, where did you read that verse that you just read? Those.
This is it's the Levite marriage.
And when I was reading Ruth and thinking about the scripture, this was a few months back, but it just really resonates on how substantial a man Boaz was in the way that he handled that situation, how much honor that he brought to that situation, and handled the whole thing. You know, that just really kind of shines through, knowing what precepts he was acting off of.
Right. So to answer the question, why are we reading it? We're reading it because, Mark has a question. We're reading it because this is the pattern that Judah is doing so that his first son, Er, can have, his name will live on like it's being described here in Deuteronomy, in the Torah.
And I think it's noteworthy to interject this at this point, and that is, it has never been God's intent for these kinds of things for man to have pleasures. The purpose of this law was so that the woman that could not take care of herself was going to be taken care of.
Right.
It's always been about, like he says, take care of the widow, the poor, the needy, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, give those who are thirsty something to drink. It's always about taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves. And in Ruth and Naomi's situation, there's two women who've had the men in their household die. They're left destitute, and someone has to step up. God has made a provision that women are not going to just die and abandon and unable to take care of themselves. That's what this is about.
Amen.
And this one man in Boaz's scenario, he wanted the property, but he wasn't willing to do the other part of it. And
Right.
so, this is where and I want to emphasize this. This is where the real tough stuff about being a believer in God's kingdom is all about. Is the toughest thing is to love your neighbor as yourself. This is what's tough, because we want to put ourselves first. It's all about self instead of what's right for that human being. And if we have God's heart, we're going to love that person, and we're going to be secondary. They're going to be taken care of.
So it's our responsibility to do the welfare system? Is that what I'm hearing? No, we're supposed to be doing that. And if we delegate it to somebody else, we're not doing our job. And I mean somebody else, meaning like the state. We got to figure out how to take that back fully. I could talk a lot about that. What else do we want to talk about? So let's talk about this deal that went down, this negotiations, if you will. Let me just read 13. And it was told to Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath, which, by the way, means portion, to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath, where she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So Judah isn't doing his responsibility here, right? He's not really he's not looking out for her welfare would be another way of looking at it. Go ahead. Let me just,
I was just thinking about how this kind of speaks to Judah's character as well, because like she knew that if she did this, what response she was likely to get, enough to dress up like a prostitute and go somewhere. So like that, she had to have been pretty sure that she was going to be able to get this response from him going out like that with that intention.
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it could be seen as being a very risky move, but on the other hand, if you're limited in choices, you're limited in choices, right? There's no, I'm going to go to the state welfare department because this is her future. This is her how she's going to be provided for in her future.
She didn't leave outside of her family. She joined the family. That's her family.
Right. So I'm not even sure there's anything she does technically wrong by intent. I don't know. Others might disagree, but
I wasn't really trying to suggest she was doing something wrong, but
No.
that it speaks to the character of Judah that she dressed up like a prostitute and went knowing that he would respond to her.
so she thinks she knew that he
She
would-
knew that he would take advantage. He would
Take
respond to that
advantage.
situation, and
That's-
she had a good chance of being hired by him.
right.
I think from her end, she feels like he owes her,
Oh, definitely.
and I don't that's not unjustified at all. So
Maybe her deceased husband in pillow talk told her what he had seen his dad doing.
Okay, so let's talk about what the conversation here. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot because she had covered her face, and she turned into her, by the way, and said, "Go to, I pray thee. Let me come into thee," for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What wilt thou giveth me that thou mayest come into me?" Now, let me just stop there. One thing I noticed was, doesn't this kind of remind you a little bit like Jacob? Jacob doesn't realize the one who he thinks he's going to marry and go into isn't the one he actually goes into. There's a parallel there. I mean, it's not as he's not acting nearly as bad as Jacob is at all. I mean, Judah is, but it's just kind of interesting how both the women are in disguise. They don't recognize it. So what wilt thou give me, and thou mayest come into me? And he said, I will send a kid from the flock. And she said, what wilt thou give me? A pledge till thou send it. Will you give me a pledge till thou send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet, thy bracelets, and thy staff in thine hand. And he gave it to her, and came into her, and she conceived by him. Let's see, the word. Let me look here on my word. The word for pledge is eravon. And the three things what are the three things that were given to her? Yeah, the bracelet, the staff, and the signet ring, and the bracelet and the staff. Any idea what those represent? So if this is like Mark was suggesting, that he's in a Canaanite-ish religious environment, priestly kind of, doing priestly things, in many ways these things that he has enable him to do his priestly things, right? And he's sort of like, whatever, I'll just get rid of these. What do I need these for? Doesn't that speak pretty badly of him?
Symbols of authority. She knew what they represented. She wanted to have them as the pledge.
Right. But that's, you know, that's not like, well, it's everything for him, I would think. What is more valuable than that besides, you know, life itself? He's doing the functions. You need those things to do the things he needs to do in life if he's going to be a priest. Wendy has a question?
So I was thinking two things about this part because, first of all, he kind of just hands him over to her, sort of like Esau and the cup of soup.
Yeah, he's very casual about it almost.
And they are symbols of his authority. And the inheritance kind of gets passed on to her son, you know, for as far as the line to the Messiah.
Right.
So I think that it's very symbolic, him handing it over to her, because then through Perez, like it's later. But
Right.
I thought that was interesting as well.
No, that's a good connection, that he's acting like Esau in a way. He's not showing regard for what he ought to be doing.
Are we to take from this story that he had more than one set of this stuff? Because
What?
he didn't send the goat to redeem him, or the sheep, or whatever he was going to.
No, he did. Yeah, let's read that. Let's read that so we'll talk about that. We'll just read to the end of the chapter. Who wants to read where do we stop? At 20? 21? Okay, so let's do 19 to the end. Pat's going to read.
And she arose and went away and laid by her veil from her and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There was no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot. And also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth. And he let her be burned. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By this man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelets, and staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou taken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name's called Perez. And afterwards came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was Zerah.
Thank you.
May I
ahead,
comment
go
there
ahead.
that you were asking about whether she had sinned, and it's mentioned even by Judah himself that she was righteous in her deed because she was keeping the law.
I love this response. She doesn't make a statement. She asks a question. She knows the answer, right? Obviously. But she lays out the evidence and lets Judah make the statement. Let Judah come up with what the answer is. I just think that's classic.
I don't think she called Judah called her righteous. He just called her more righteous than he. You know, in the Torah, the father doesn't sleep with the daughter-in-law.
Right.
So, or the daughter with the father-in-law.
Right.
So there's all sorts of stuff going on there that's,
Right, by the way, that's in Leviticus 18:15. A man shall not have relations with his daughter-in-law.
and
That's Leviticus 18:15. A man shall not have relations with his daughter-in-law. Of course, he doesn't know it's his daughter-in-law, but she knows.
yeah, she
Yeah.
knows. And, you
It's
know,
his
and there's sacrifice for the unknown sin. So if you don't know the sin, but it seems he rushes to burn her, you know, another Torah rule about an adulteress, you know, but he
I
doesn't.
think we went over that. As I remember,
Yeah.
you do burn if it's a
A witch.
a
right,
co-
or-
no no a Kohen, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think so.
Judah, yeah.
Right. So she was treating her like the punishment was like she was.
But there was no man present. Is that why he asked her, you know, by who are you pregnant? To find out. Right.
If she's a Kohen, if she's a daughter of a Kohen, I think. Put him up, get him on the mic. Get him on the mic. Mike.
So we were talking about the city of Adullam being a royal place, and she comes from there. So obviously Judah knows she's the daughter of a priest, or he wouldn't be requesting her to be burned with fire. So this is, again, this royalty that we were talking about.
Right.
Here she is. He just didn't select anybody. He picked the daughter of a priest of a Canaanite priest, and which may have been he may have been serving at this temple, and so he's saying she needs to be burned with fire.
Does this remind anybody? Wendy has a question. Do you have a question still?
Isn't he going to do this before the Torah is given at Sinai?
Right. Well, there's a lot of things that are, right. I don't know if I'm reaching here, but this almost sounds like when they accuse the prostitute woman in John 7. They bring her to Yeshua to make a judgment. Right. And I think it's happening on the temple floor because I don't know, I just think there's a comparison there as well.
In this text too, they refer to her as a harlot in some of the texts, but it calls her a cult prostitute in the ESV. And the word used or translated as whore is actually similar to the word kadosh, like for set apart. It's got the same
Right,
letters in it, but it's like one vowel difference.
right.
And so, like she was acting as a holy a prostitute for like religious purposes. Yeah, like I don't really understand all of that, but she was. It was not just like your normal girl on the street, whatever. She's really, the place where she was in obviously was related to the temple, like he said, and this kind of supports that line of reasoning that this
It has religious implications.
it does, and that the city was that way, was
Right.
very like spiritually oriented in whichever religion they were doing.
So, what's my note? I have a note here on that. In Genesis 39, verse 31. The Hebrew word for harlot is haksana, and it has this enlarged Zion. Leviticus 21:9.
Yeah, it's the law of the priest burning his daughter if she's caught playing the harlot.
My question is, if she was a temple prostitute, in verse 14 it says she sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnah.
I think two words are being used here. I remember researching that. Verse 14.
I want to make a comment just before you go on to the next part that you're going to read. So if anybody has a comment about what you're talking about now, I don't want to sidetrack you because
Well-
I kind of have a small can of worms to.
Okay, so let me just look at this. In 15, when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot. This is, I don't have Strong's. Zana is the word. Like Zona. Where is this? Zion, Noon, Hey. It's a different word. Okay.
I have a question.
over
We were just talking about the signet ring, and wasn't the signet ring something that it pledged an authority? For example, things could be bought with that ring.
Right.
It represented that person. So the fact that Judah was willing to give a harlot his signet ring as a pledge, I think speaks loudly in terms of where he was at that time.
Yeah, and that's kind of when we started off. He went down. This is his morally, he's sliding down.
Okay. Okay, so this is one of my very favorite chapters. I have many, but there's so much in here that connects to other pieces of the story that we know. And so maybe somebody that's a better mathematician can follow along with what I'm going to say. But I had the chart up on the wall for a few weeks just because I wanted to document some things as we were reading back through this again. Just because in every time I've tried to add this up, it always comes back to these children that were Judah's sons that were put to death. If I'm reading this story correctly, they had to be very, very young. So let me
Right.
kind of start just a general outline. If we know that, which I do know this, is that Jacob was about 100 years old when Benjamin was born. We can go back through scripture, but I don't want to take up all this time, but he was about 100 years old. I'm going to be rough this. It could have been 99, but it says he was a son of my old age. He was about 100 years old. If we back up to when he first went, the age that we have scripture that documents about the time that he went and left his family, went up and began having these children, he was about 80 when he left his family and went to begin his family.
Right.
Living with, okay, and then he has his sons. All of these sons that are with Leah, Rachel, and their concubines were all born in a very short period of time. They may have been having pregnancies at the same time, but they're all born in a short amount of time. So all these boys are very close in age. So I know that there's not a very large gap in age between Judah and Joseph. We know that Joseph was put in the well when he was 17.
Right.
So let's give Judah a few more years and say maybe he was, just for a rough estimate, he was about 20 years old when his brother Joseph was put in the well. We also know that when Jacob went before Pharaoh, he claims that my pilgrimage has been 130 years. So that means that at the time that the famine, the years of plenty are over, the famine is over, and now Jacob has come with his family to Egypt, and he's standing before Pharaoh. He says, my pilgrimage has been 130 years. So this means that Benjamin is about 30 years old at this time. So given a little bit older that Judah would have been, at this time Judah can only be not that much older than 30. So if we back that up to looking at how old he was when this story that we're reading is taking place, and all of this happens, he's very young. Let's say he's 20. Okay, he has one son, that makes him 21. He has another son, that he's 22. He has a third son, he's 23. Now, these sons had to grow up, so how, when I do the math at how old he had to have been at the time that this is taking place with Tamar.
So Onan was probably, I'm guessing, 15?
I'm even thinking
Younger?
less than that, because when we have the account of when they went into Egypt, if the names that are given to us are actually people that were born, that were head counts that went into Egypt, we have Perez and is it Zerah? We have a head count of them, and we have a head count of Perez's two sons. Yes, Perez's two sons that are twins, Hezron and Hamuel. They're counted in that count. So if you even take in account that Perez needed to be old enough to father a child, to have children that are in that head count, that's why I was putting the timeline. We're backing this up to where these children that Judah had when they were fathering children, they were very young,
Right.
to make the timeline work in all this. And I don't know, we could talk about it later and fill in all the numbers, but I just think it's very interesting that we're talking about, I don't know, he's a very young man making decisions, and all of his forefathers before him were probably 80-some years old before they began even having families and children. And here we have a very young man getting involved. But the interesting thing is, regardless of all this that took place, the father still uses Perez's son, it comes through Perez's son, Hezron, who births the father of David. So,
David?
yes. But yeah, Boaz, who births,
And later on.
Yes, later on, down the road.
Many, many generations later.
Yeah, if we look at Chronicles, we see that that's where the father of David comes from, is through Perez's son.
Right.
So interesting that even despite our failures or our transgressions, iniquities, the Father still can use us. And I think this shows us that somewhere along the line, Judah probably came to repentance for what he had done, and the Father forgave him and brought a blessing through his children, or through his seed.
Well, this is something I'd like to talk about. This whole event, when Judah, we just did it in Shabbat, when he's making the case to the Pharaoh, who he doesn't realize is Joseph, you can tell he's really passionate about it. And he talks about his father numerous times. And I would say it's because of this event. This chapter explains that how far he'd gone down and realized the consequences of his actions. So I think that explains why his mind shift changes. To your point, if these children are, if they're children having children is essentially what you're saying. One of them God just kills. There's no commentary on it, so that would imply that was not a good thing. That they were having children too soon. Is that a fair? Right. That's, well, I think it's because, but he said it's because he was concerned that he would get killed too. But eventually, he did grow up, but he still didn't. He ignored his responsibility to Tamar. So, when in these two, the twins that are given to Tamar, to me this reminds me again of Jacob and Esau, because there's a struggle. It doesn't really say there's a struggle, not like Esau and Jacob was, but you can tell it's like Shelah put his hand out, but was it Shelah, right? But Perez, not Sheila, what's his name? I should get it right. Zerah? Where is it? I'm on the wrong page. So Zerah puts his hand out first. They put the red ribbon around that. Huh? Well, why did she doing that is the question. She's the midwife, and it's important to figure out who the firstborn is. So
in Scripture, did they tie red things around other things that were important? Huh?
Not
the
what?
Well, weren't first fruits designated that way?
Is that right?
So they would tie, the first fruit would get a red ribbon tied around it because that's what's going to be offered to the Almighty.
Right.
Well, if this child's the first fruit, the first
Right.
that opens the womb, well, he's going to be consecrated to the Almighty as the firstborn.
Right.
So he's going to be set apart as the first fruits to the Almighty. He says, all the firstborn are mine.
Right. So Pharez, which means breach, like he breached the contract being that Zerah is the firstborn. That's the contract that was breached. It's like he pulls him back and goes out the womb first. Kind of like with Esau and Jacob. One understanding of the definition of Jacob is hand on heel, because they were struggling with each other, and Esau was like trying to push Jacob down to be the first one out the womb. I don't know. So it's just another parallel between what's already happened in the past with this story. Let's see, what else? Let me read some of Jerry's questions. Is there any other questions?
You could put the argument that the sons of Ishmael are doing the same thing with the sons of Isaac, struggling over, who really is supposed to be the firstborn here? Who really should be receiving the firstborn rights here? And so it's that same struggle, and maybe this is the struggle that was going on between Cain and Abel.
Well, that's true, but if the church doesn't want to identify itself with being Israel, can you blame? You almost can't blame Ishmael to say, well, if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it. So the point is, it behooves the church to identify who they are. They need to be proactive in identifying themselves as being Israel. The house of Israel, I would say, more likely, but yeah. Should we, any other questions? We can go to the next chapter. The next chapter being chapter 39. Anybody want to read the first, let's say, 4 chapters or verses? This is about Joseph gets sold to Potiphar, and his wife accuses him of adultery, and he gets thrown in prison. That's the headlines. Wendy wants to read? Oh, we got one over there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How many?
How far? Let's read the first 4 verses.
And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand.
Let's keep going down to next 2 more verses.
And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored.
Okay. Any thoughts on that? How did Joseph end up in jail? He was accused.
Yeah, Joseph was accused of having his master's wife, so
Right.
he ended up in jail eventually.
So do you think when the accusation came that Potiphar believed his wife or not?
I believe Potiphar might have believed Joseph, but because she was his wife, I think he had to act on that, she's his wife and she's closest to him.
Well, plus she makes a public spectacle of it, if you will, right? She doesn't go to him and deal with it in private. She makes it because she's trying to trick him into sleeping with him.
There was some strong water there directing the ship.
Strong water directing the ship.
It reminds me of, what's his name, the Roman ruler when Yeshua is being, Pilate. Wasn't his wife giving Pilate the same kind of trying to direct the ship there? So, yeah, this is what happens, and so obviously the ship got directed that direction.
But I would think a reasonable thing would be that he should have been killed. But he realizes.
He mentioned John the Baptist, too, the same situation.
Oh, okay. John the Baptist, same situation. The definition I have for Potiphar, or the meaning, belonging to the Son. S-U-N. Let's see. Verse 4. I want to look up this word overseer. The Potiphar, it means belonging to the Son, consecrated to Ra, one of the gods of Lower Egypt. He whom Ra gave.
He's at the city of the sun.
Right, he's at the city of the sun. So let me go to the next chapter here. Go here. I wanted to look up this word for overseer for Joseph. Verse 4.
I just find it interesting that Potiphar, even though he was dedicated to a pagan god, saw the just the potential and the talents and the trustworthiness in Joseph enough to put him in the position that he put him in. And sometimes I think as believers, we forget that even people who worship pagan gods or don't know God can exalt us because of what they see in us.
Right. So this is a good lesson. We should learn from Joseph to still have faith and not give up on what we're supposed to be doing, and have faith that Yahweh will resolve the issue for you. This word here for overseer in verse 9, vayeftechu. It's like the word pakad. You see the pei, the kuf, and the dalet. I think that's the root of that word. And it's like when, one of my favorite verses is in Exodus chapter 20, visiting the iniquity of the fathers. It's the same word. It's visiting. It's like an accounting concept that you will be held accountable, and it's also just an accounting kind of understanding. Okay, where did we read to? Let's keep reading then. Who wants to read from 7 to 12? Javaro's going to read. All right.
And after these events, it came to be that the master's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has given it into my hands, and all that he has. No one is greater in the house than I, and he has not withheld whatever from me, but you, because you are his wife. How shall I do this great evil and sin against Elohim?" And it came to be, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, and he did not listen to her, to lie with her, to be with her. And it came to be on a certain day when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hands and fled and ran outside.
Well, let's keep reading. Sorry.
And it came to be when she saw that he had left his garments in her hand and fled outside, she called for the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought in to us Abri to mock us. And he came in to me and lied with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it came to be when he had heard that I lifted my voice, he cried out that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. And she kept his garment with her until the master came home. And she spoke to him these same words, saying, "The Abri servant whom you brought to us came into me to mock me. So it came to be as I lifted my voice and cried out, and he left his garment with me and fled outside. And it came to be when his master heard the words of which his wife had spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me according to the words that his displeasure burned. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the sovereign's prisoners were confined.
Okay,
And he was there in the prison.
okay. Let's stop there. Well, wait a minute. Keep going. There's only 3 verses left, so we might as well finish it off.
But Yahweh was with Joseph and extended kindness to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And the prison warden gave into the hands of Joseph all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there was his doing. And the prison warden did not look into any point that was under Joseph's hand, because Yahweh was with him. And whatever he did, Yahweh made it prosper.
Thank you. Any thoughts?
Just a question.
Huh?
So it sounds like even when Potiphar, quote unquote, publicly punished Joseph, he put him in a good place.
Right.
Because he put him in the prisons where the sovereign prisoners were kept. not in the hardest part of the prison, I presume.
Well, yours said sovereign, what verse was that? I think mine just is into, and Joseph's master took him and put him into, oh, yeah, you're right, into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound.
So I just want to backtrack just a couple of minutes whenever it was being talked about how even though this pagan god was being served here in Israel and Potiphar was being used there, how they still recognized Joseph's
Talent.
gifts and talents. And it reminded me of a passage I've been trying to find, and I just found it. So it says in Ezekiel 36, "For his holy name's sake, Yahweh will bring Israel back from its dispersion into his own land, purify it from its sins, sanctify it by his Spirit to be his own people. Therefore say to the house of Israel, thus says Yahweh, I do not do it for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake, which you have profaned among the nations which you have come. I will sanctify my great name, which is profaned among the nations, which you have profaned in the midst of them, so that the nations will know that I am Yahweh, is the saying of the Lord Yahweh, when I prove myself holy upon you before their eyes." So we're going to be proved, it's going to happen through us like it was happening through Joseph, that the nations will know, they'll recognize something's going to happen upon us that's going to be known that only the real God could be doing this to these people.
So that's Ezekiel, what was it? You didn't give the verse numbers. 20.
Ezekiel 36, 21 through 23.
21 to 23. But in there, right. But they're behaving badly, and Yahweh's still going to use them. The question is, why don't you just do the right thing and be blessed like Joseph will be blessed?
And just to add what he said, I think when this time comes and the change comes, we're going to have the same attitude that Joseph had, like in verse 9, where Joseph said, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He wasn't thinking about sinning against the master or anybody else in the house. He knew it was going to be a sin against God. So, hallelujah.
He's thinking about his covenant relationship with Yahweh first. How does it affect that? Not good. Okay, I'm not doing that. So he gets thrown in the prison, verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But Yahweh was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that he was under his hand, because Yahweh was with him, and that which he did, Yahweh made it to prosper. So he made things prosper even in the prison. Can we say this is the first prison ministry?
This just reminded me of a verse in Proverbs, and it's in Proverbs 18:16. A man's gift makes room for him and bringeth him before great men.
So if you do the right thing, Yahweh will find a way to open the right doors and close the right doors to get you to a place where you have impact on the world. Is that fair? Paula has a question.
Okay, my comment is on 39:11. One day when he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the other household servants were inside. Number one, here he has just coming from the perspective of a woman who already has a plan in mind, conveniently has arranged for him to have duties in the home, and none of the other servants have any duties in the home at this time.
No witnesses.
Yeah, and has removed them, and yeah, conveniently Joseph has duties in the house this day. So I think that maybe, I don't know,
Well, the evidence.
maybe the wise husband here of his wicked wife already knew what she had, probably arranged.
Right. And what is the evidence that she uses to prove that he was there? He left his garment in her hand. As he fled away. This garment keeps getting Joseph in trouble. His brothers don't like it. I'm assuming it's the same garment. Maybe not. Well, I guess it can't be, because it can't be, but it's a garment.
I mean, I know for a law, it's supposed to be two or more witnesses, right?
Right.
But remember, we dealing with a pagan worshiper, so maybe he don't know the laws. Maybe just the impression that Joseph was a good man, that he dealt with him merciful.
Oh, I'm sure he did. Yeah.
Right.
But the status that he had was, what kind of status did he have in a legal proceeding? What we would think people should have, you shouldn't be respected as persons, but with Joseph, in Potiphar's eye, he's a slave. They bought him when he was brought down to Egypt. So he's not, the due process for someone of this legal status is going to be pretty limited, I would think.
So I'm not sure that this applies, but my mind is drawn to something I had been studying. I'm not ready to teach on it yet, but I've been studying about the importance of the man's garment, especially in the context of Boaz, and when Ruth came in and pulled his skirt over her,
Right.
and then asked him to go ahead and wanted him to do it. And so that garment, I've been finding out, is a sign of betrothal. It's a sign that I'm taking you unto myself. And it wasn't just done amongst Israelites, it was done in the Near East. It was a custom done. So maybe the garment in this situation is playing more into this than we realize that it is.
Do anyone know if Potiphar was still alive when Joseph became like the first head in Egypt?
Was
Because to me, for him to see Joseph climb that ladder, because Joseph was the head of his household, went to prison, was the head of the prison, went to Pharaoh and became the head of Egypt. I wonder what kind of a relationship Potiphar and his wife would have had after that.
Well, yeah, that's, their culture, we kind of project what we think the right and wrong, and we project what their culture would be, and who knows how the values that they have would be different than what we have. So I heard some commentaries on that they were very, not at all a similar culture with similar values. Let's see here. Oh, I wanted to make a comment. At the end of 23, let me read it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because Yahweh was with him, and that which Yahweh made it to prosper. And that which he did, Yahweh made it to prosper. My notes say that is the last time Yahweh is used until you get to Genesis 49:18. So what's that? From 38 to 49, or 39, that's 10 chapters. Some people make a big deal about that. I don't think it is, but The reason I don't think it's a big deal is because Joseph is so in tune with Yahweh. Yahweh doesn't need to manage and interfere with his life. He's got it figured out pretty much on his own.
About whether Potiphar was still alive. So this could be controversial, but part of what we have looked at that has been recorded by other sages, and I don't know that it could be proved, and it's something Mark had mentioned a few Shabbats back, is that when we get to, let me see where this is, 41, and it talks about Potiphera, priest of On, it was noted that this was Potiphar. So,
The
Not-
research,
yeah, so I don't know.
it's spelled
It's a
little.
thought.
I think it's spelled a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it is the same. Your commentary said it was?
Yeah, in several places we've looked at, it has been noted that this was thought to be Potiphar.
Okay.
So I don't know if at part of the story we read, he was captain of the guard. Maybe he transitioned into this other position down the road. But it's an interesting thought.
Any other questions? Because we finished 2 chapters. Jerry will be pleased, I think. Charlie says he will. Let's close off in prayer then. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening to be able to gather together and study your word and dig deep into it and come to have a better understanding of characters in the Bible like Judah and Joseph and how they interact with other people. It's important that we understand these things so we can go about and do what you would have us do, Heavenly Father. I pray these things in the name of your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. Thank you.